Hello, everyone. We're going to start today's notes with a few examples. I would like you to write down on your notes some examples of homozygous, either the definition or an example of what that would look like, either the genotype. A genotype would be good. Heterozygous, a genotype would be good, which means letters. And what genotype is, give an example of that. That would be words. So homozygous, heterozygous, genotype, give an example of each. You can use an example from what you've learned in the first sections. Phenotype, dominant allele, and recessive allele. You can just use simple letters for some of these. Okay, number two, cross a heterozygous tall plant with a short plant by using a Punnett square. So show your Punnett square. Make sure you write down first what the parents are going to be. Heterozygous means different, remember that. And short plant, think about it. Think homozygous recessive there. Okay, and then come up with the percentage out of the Punnett square of the offspring that may be short. Okay, Mendel's conclusions and dihybrid clauses, section 11.3. These are going to be fill-in notes from on chat that you'll find on, you're going to put on page 98. You're going to get the handout, so you just have to fill in the blanks. Okay, so Mendel's conclusion number one, he concluded that genes control traits. Okay, what this means is that individual factors that are passed from one generation to the next control each trait. We now call those factors genes. And just a reminder, alleles are different forms of a gene. As explained in class or earlier, an allele, just think of like a tennis shoe is like a gene, and then the alleles are the different types of tennis shoes we have out there. They're still tennis shoes, but there's different versions of tennis shoes. So that's the same relationship between that and genes and alleles. An allele is basically one of the different forms found in nature that we find of the genes. So some genes have many alleles and some have only two alleles, like the ones Mendel studied. Okay, Mendel's conclusion number two, principle of dominance. That states that some alleles are dominant and some alleles are recessive. So the dominant and recessive, we use capital letters for the dominant and then stay in the same alphabet and use the lowercase for the recessive. I believe this is a fairly simple, the simplest one of his conclusions. The third conclusion states that is basically this law of segregation. I know we haven't covered this yet, but we will in the next section. Um, Meiosis. So it states that two alleles are segregated during meiosis. So how does this happen? Well, if you look at the pictures here, during anaphase 1 and anaphase 2, which soon will mean something to you, the chromosomes in the cell to create sperm and egg cells, they must separate to create half cells. So there is a separation of the genes so you can make half cells like sperm and egg, and that's called meiosis. So the genes actually get split up, and that's what it means. His fourth conclusion states is basically the law of independent assortment, and it means that genes from different traits may assort independently from one another. In other words, just because you get blonde hair, it doesn't mean you get blue eyes or green eyes or fair skin. You can have different combinations of the many genes that come together, and they don't come in packages. They basically can separate. That's why parents sometimes don't look, or kids don't look exactly like the parents. You get like a combination. You don't get a true one. Every now and then you get like sets of genes that go together, but that's just out of coincidence. It's not. It has nothing to do with the actual. Some of them do stick together, but we have known some instances of linked genes, but mostly all of them separate independently. Okay, a little more about the law of independent assortment. Um, because of the law of independent assortment, you can have combinations, like I said, with uh, different than your parents. You can look different from them. Some people look very, very unique in their family. For example, your father can have dark eyes and dark hair, um, brown eyes and dark hair, really brown eyes, and but you may have a different trait inherited because the dark is generally the more dominant, but you inherit recessive. So you can get very different combinations, and you can get, and we see those all over families. Okay, so just in summary, genes control traits. That's the number one conclusion. Number two conclusion, the principle of dominance, that some alleles are dominant and some alleles are recessive. And three, the law of segregation. Alleles are separated during meiosis, and you get one from each parent. The law of independent assortment, the fourth one, is that genes for different traits may assort independently of one another, and so we get different combinations. So those are the four laws, four conclusions that you must memorize and understand for the test. Okay, this is just for fun to see what kind of combinations this would develop. So if we follow the law of independent assortment, you could get you could get this. So that'd be something to think about. So in Mendel's experiment, he looked at these seven traits that he saw as different. So we've done these in class in the previous presentations. So we went over the differences that he saw in the pea population that he investigated. Mendel's dihybrid cross. Okay, so he did all that work on the monohybrid crosses, and then he figured, you know what? I can use more math and do two at a time and see if I can figure that one out. So here are some examples of how he used math in order to kind of cross two traits at a time. So what about if a plant had wrinkled the shape of the pea and the color of the pea. Those are two different traits. So would he be able to figure out the combinations? Would the math hold up to show that what the inheritance of the two traits together, would it hold up? So this is his test of his monohybrid cross method. So he got one parent that is homozygous round and yellow, and the other parent is homozygous wrinkled and green. So first thing you have to do is pick out letters that represent each trait. So big R for round, little r for wrinkled, big Y for yellow, little y for green. Write the genotypes of the parents. So here you've got parent one is homozygous round. So that's what homozygous round looks like right there. And then homozygous yellow. Um, so that would look like two capital Y's right there. And then the second parent is homozygous recessive because it is wrinkled. And then you got green, and because that is recessive, it's homozygous recessive to be green, so little y's. And those are the two parents. And then you find the possible gametes, special cells involved in sexual reproduction, such as sperm and egg. And then you use the 13, 14, 23, and 24 rule, which means basically you get the first parent and you cross number one with number three, 13. You cross then number one and number four, that's 14. Then the 23, the number second allele, that big R with a big Y, 24. And then you do the same thing for the alleles of the second parent. Number one with number three, number one with number four, number two with number three, and number two with number four. So that's the 13, 14, 23, and 24 rule. Okay, so what you do then is that you put at the top, across the top, you put the 13, the result of the 13 cross, the big R and big Y, the 14, big R, big Y, the 23, big R, big Y, and the 24, big R, big Y. And then on the side, you did the same thing to the other parent, 13, little r, little y, 14, little r, little y, 23, little r, little y, and 24, little r, little y. And then you just bring them down to fill in all the boxes of this combination of this giant Punnett square. And that's the way a dihybrid cross is done. And pretty much this one looks very repetitive. If you get homozygous anything times homozygous anything, it makes for a very repetitive Punnett square. But that's basically the way you. So then you cross big R, big. Then you what would happen if you crossed two of the plants that were the offspring of the parent generation? So two F1 plants. So big would be big R, little r, big Y, little y, what would the next generation look like? So the F2 generation. In order to do that, you have to follow the steps. You have to figure out the big, you have to use the 13, 14, 23, and 24 rule again. So if you've got these, 13 would be big R, big Y, 14 would be big R, little y, 23 would be little r, big Y, and 24 would be a little r, little y, and you put those across the top. And then you do this because you've got two of the same ones, you use the same ones and you line the side. You can see here in red. And then you fill in the Punnett square, and that would tell you the different ones that that combination would yield. And it's a little trickier, and then you could figure out the different phenotypes because now it's going to vary greatly. So here's basically what you would get. You would get 9 round yellow, 3 round green, 3 wrinkled yellow, and 1 wrinkled green, or a 9-3-3-1 combination. So with the F1, F2 generation, breeding two F1s together, you wind up with this combination, a 9-3-3-1. 9 homozygous dominant, 1 homozygous for round and homozygous for yellow, for green or hetero. So you can see all the combinations there. Take a minute to look very carefully at this because it is a little bit confusing if you don't get it. Okay, so round yellow phenotype. Now, 9 round yellow plants. As you can see here, the breakdown of how that goes and the Punnett square. So these are all round yellow because dominant is big S, big Y, round. So round yellow, in this case, S is used instead of R. And you can see the dihybrid Punnett square. And here you've got a round green phenotype. So you basically figure out the ones that have two little y's with at least one big S. And you can see them right there. So here you have the wrinkled, wrinkled yellow. So you're looking for something that has the recessive in the S's and the at least one dominant Y, and you can see them right there at the bottom. And here you've got the wrinkled in green. There's only one that has recessive for wrinkled and recessive for color. Little S's and little Y's. So this tells you that the phenotypic ratio is 9:3:3 to 1. That means that there's 9 smooth yellow. Oh, on the next one, there is 3 smooth green. Then the next one is 3 wrinkled yellow, and finally 1 wrinkled and green. So here you have a sample problem. Okay, in mice, black is dominant over tan, and short tails are dominant over long. Use big B or capital B for black and lowercase b for tan. Use big S for short and little s for long. Write the genotype for the heterozygous black and short-tailed mouse. That's step 1. Step 2, cross 2 of these individuals. So create a Punnett square. So from that Punnett square, you're going to then describe the phenotype of the offspring. Okay, so here are the answers for the previous problem. So we've got a mouse that is heterozygous for black and it has a short tail. So heterozygous for black is a big B, little b. That's a heterozygote. No, the B's don't look alike. It's an uppercase and lowercase. And short tail is a dominant trait. So a heterozygous short would be a big S and a little s also. And there's 2 of them. So here you go. And then you use the 13, 14, 23, 24 rule that we talked about earlier. So basically you get the big B with the big S, 13, the big B with the little s, that's 14, 2 and 3, and the second one and the third one, the little b and big S, that's the third one. And then finally you get the fourth one, the little b, or 24, the little b and the little s, that gives you the little b and a little s. And it turns out to be the same thing because you're crossing the 2 of the same things. So go ahead and put that along the side there. And then you fill in your Punnett square like you see here, and you wind up with basically the phenotype of the offspring. 9 black short, 3 black long, 3 10 short, and 1 10 long out of 16. And this gives you approximately what we have seen in the previous mixes from the peas, the heterozygous mix. You get a 9331. Okay, that concludes the notes for today. Hope you did well on the quiz, and I hope that you enjoy this and are able to understand this. If you have any further questions, please make sure you ask them in class in order to address this. If you're totally confused, please also help me do some Punnett squares for you so you can get more information on these. Thank you. Bye.